Hi guys, so today's video is going to be a list of some books that were originally self-published in some fashion and now are traditionally published. And what I'm really excited about is the fact that some of these you probably do know used to be self-published, but some of them I think you might be surprised to find out weren't always traditionally published. And what I think is so fantastic about this list is it just goes to show there are so many different roads to success when it comes to putting out a book. I also want to highlight the fact that being traditionally published is not necessarily the end goal for everyone. That is not a mark of success necessarily. There are a lot of people who start self-published and stay self-published. That is their goal. That's what works best for them. Kicking off the list, we have Sunlin Ascends by Josiah Bancroft. This is a story that follows a man who is separated from his wife at the Tower of Babel. It's somewhat steampunk and Victorian inspired, which is a very fun mix. And we see Thomas Sunlin, trying to ascend the tower in search of his wife. Every different level of the tower is its own bizarre adventure, and it's also quite metaphorical. There's so many ways in which you can interpret some of the things that are transpiring. The writing is not lyrical the way that something like Strange the Dreamer is, which almost borders on purple prose, if not is purple prose, but it is beautiful in its own way. It's very symbolic at times, but it is slightly more direct. It's definitely something that is easily digestible, but when you kind of distance yourself from it, it has this poetic nature to it. There's a really great interview with Josiah Bancroft about self-publishing, but I wanted to highlight this specific part where it says that he had spent 10 years sending out queries and mailing blind submissions, and that he was tired of spending most of his time dealing with the gatekeepers. He wanted an audience, even a modest one, for all its difficulties. Self-publication pretty much guarantees that if you put it out there, someone will read it. The decision was really liberating because he didn't have to worry about negotiating with editors or appealing to trends or wooing agents. He could just sit down and write the story that he wanted to write. I went ahead and grabbed my copy off the shelf. But what I think is so fascinating is this is the kind of book that when I read it, I could definitely see this being read in a classroom, kind of having somebody with more knowledge guiding you through it, making you have discussions with other people and talking about what did you think this represented, or what do you think is going on here, what is symbolic about this moment. It's the kind of book that I could see in a classroom setting. It just goes to show that all kinds of books can come from different origins, specifically in this instance self-published origins, and be absolutely fantastic. Moving into the next book, which would be Rage of Dragons. If you don't know, I am okay with talking about books that didn't personally work for me, because I think that we all have such varied tastes that I'm comfortable talking about what might work for you. And Rage of Dragons is one of those books. There were certain aspects of the book that were not for me, but this is a story that has been very well loved by so many people who have picked it up. It is at its core a classic revenge story. We have our main character, Tao. He experiences hardships in his life by being a part of the lower classes of his society, and as a result of the injustices that his class faces, he witnesses something happen to someone he cares about and now wants revenge for that particular thing. I personally didn't love this book simply because I'm quite picky when it comes to my revenge stories and my main characters. I am still so appreciative of the fact that this was eventually traditionally published, because I think it's important that we have all kinds of stories, have all potential for different kinds of publishing, and I'm glad that something with such important themes has not been secluded to this corner of self-publishing and that way of getting your story out. It's not like this is the only place that your story can belong. This kind of a story with these kinds of themes and these kinds of characters can belong anywhere. In an interview with Evan Winter, he says of Rage of Dragons, "I was originally self-published. I was very fortunate in the response it got. The book did better than my wildest hopes for it to do. By the time a publisher contacted me, the book was doing well enough as a self-published project that I didn't need to look for another job. My plan at the time was to keep writing and put up a series that was entirely self-published. For me, success is continuing to make a living and supporting my family through my writing. Beyond that, the most important thing is being able to tell the stories that I would love. I originally didn't want to give up too much control, but they really seem to believe in the project, and the editor I've been working with has been great. Her passion for the genre convinced me that working with a publisher was something I should try." This next one is perhaps not what you typically think when you think self-published, but I still wanted to include it because it kind of does have a little bit of a different path to getting in your hands and purchasing it from the bookstore. And that would be Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. This is a story that follows two sisters, one who's always been dedicated to being married to a different kingdom to fulfill a marriage alliance, while the other one is the younger sister, doesn't have a care in the world, kind of does whatever she wants. The father of these two young women decides that he's gonna pull a parent trap. He's gonna have them switch places and send the younger daughter and then have the other one stay because he likes her more, which is kind of terrible. But either way, you see these two sisters, their entire lives have been one way, and now expectations for them are completely flipped. On top of that, this other kingdom has a completely different view of the world. They're seen as heretics by our main characters, and one of the characters is this being who is a returned, which is a person that has essentially come back from the dead, and now they are a god among mortals. And this particular character doesn't believe in their own divinity, and so he's quite amusing. And you're starting to see kind of some political things going on in this particular area. So it's, I think, very fun. If you like political fantasy, it's great. There's also a really fascinating magic system in this story, and it's by Brandon Sanderson. It's one of the biggest names in publishing, in fantasy, I should say. So you probably are like, it wasn't self-published. Sanderson on his website has so many different versions of the book that he would put up, and I don't know why he chose to do that. I mean, he doesn't have to. He can do whatever he wants, and we know it will do well, right? He's very successful. His Kickstarter for the Leatherbound of Stormlight Archive raised a lot of money. I don't know what, I mean, this is what he decided to do, and he made it available on his website, and it has been published, why not, by a publisher, but it kind of just goes to show, even sometimes really, really popular fantasy authors are like, I'll do it myself. On that note, we have Theft of Swords by Michael J. Sullivan. So Michael J. Sullivan is somebody who, it seems, has a mix when it comes to his books. The Theft of Swords series did start off, it's called the Rhyria Revelations, is the series name, but it started off self-published and then was picked up, and then he's had some books published, and then he has self-published some others.
Sullivan's experience is quite unique. It says here he's one of the few authors who has successfully published his books all three ways, with a traditional Big Five publisher, with a small independent publisher, and as a self-publisher. He worked in advertising for 12 years before deciding to write again. He wrote a series of books for his daughter because she was having trouble reading. He wanted to write something that would be fun to read with her. He ended up with a 6-book series, and he made them available on the internet for free. Several of his readers said that the books should be published, so he tried to sell them to traditional publishers, but there wasn't much interest. Michael's wife got involved and got him an agent. They were finally able to sell the Rhyria Revelation series to a small publisher in Minnesota, but the small publisher had economic problems because of the crash of 2008, so Michael bought back the rights to his series and began to self-publish them. The first 3 books sold modestly well. The 4th book caught on like wildfire. Michael was selling 10,000 books a month. That's when he and his wife decided they should try to sell the series to one of the big 6 traditional publishers. Orbit bought the series, repackaged, and redistributed it. He decided to run a Kickstarter to fund publication of his sci-fi book. He figured it would cost him $6,000 to publish the book, so he asked for $3,000 on Kickstarter, thinking he'd put up the other $3,000 himself to get it done. Michael's Kickstarter campaign ended up funding at over $30,000, which was a big surprise. His campaign got a lot of visibility because it funded so quickly, which allowed a lot of traffic from the Kickstarter community itself to see the project. After the success of this Kickstarter campaign, he decided to sell the print rights to his sci-fi novel.
Next up, we have The Wolf of Oranyaru. I've actually talked about this one quite a bit recently. It follows a woman who, she has a lot of political obligation. She is the leader of this one particular land. There's a lot of warlords who are trying to attain power. They're constantly, it seems like, trying to push her in one direction, and then another one will push her in another direction. She really needs her husband by her side, ruling alongside her. Their marriage was one of political significance to maintain peace, but her husband, you don't really know why. He left 5 years ago. She has the opportunity to find him and have him come back. And that's kind of what kicks off the story.
The author has a fantastic interview I'll have linked down below that talks about all the hurdles, not just with self-publishing, but trying to self-publish when you are in poverty. But I wanted to highlight this specific part. It says, self-publishing is lucrative if you hit the right margins, but I would caution anyone talking about it to understand that it isn't as simple as telling people to, quote, hire a good cover artist and get an editor. Because both things cost money, most of which many don't have to put into an endeavor many of their communities wouldn't understand. It's first and foremost a business, and as with many small businesses, to get noticed you need a certain amount of capital or a whole lot of luck. This leaves traditional publishing as the sole option for many, and yet traditional publishing has limited seats, which means the odds for the marginalized are stacked way high regardless of which route they decide to take. More often, it's not really a decision.
I'm going to mention a few more that I'm sure you've heard of, so I don't need to probably give details about what these books are about, but I do think that their origin stories are very interesting. One of them would be Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. This particular story is very popular. It's a YA series, and Sarah J. Maas, when she first started writing it, was a teenager who was just posting some things online and people really liked it and they're like, oh, I want to know what happens next. The book Aragon by Christopher Paolini. Many people know that Christopher Paolini was very young when he wrote this story, and I think that his parents kind of just sold copies of the books, and eventually they did this enough that it kind of caught somebody's eye, and then that's how we started off with this story that has since become very, very popular and something that's kind of a staple for a lot of young readers. And then lastly, we have a science fiction book, which would be The Martian. I did not know. Before I picked this story up, I had no idea that this was not... because of the movie, I don't know what it was, but I always thought that this was a book that was kind of older and then eventually got picked up and turned into a movie, which it did get turned into a movie. But it turns out that this was just something a guy posted on his blog, basically. It was kind of a similar thing with Throne of Glass, where he just kind of would post this story and people liked it, and he kept writing what would happen next, this man stranded on Mars. And I think that the way it happened was an audiobook company liked it and wanted to turn it into an audiobook, and then it kind of just kept going from there until it became one of the most popular science fiction stories. Let me know of some other books that did not start out the typical way that you would expect when it comes to traditionally published books. I would love to know what other books have fascinating, different origin stories. And then let me know if any of you were surprised to find some of these on this list. But thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you all later. Bye.